I thought I'd do a bit of an update as to where we're at with the build of the Lawley Tender. It's been a while since I've posted anything. If anybody's interested, and follow along. Here we are in eastern Ontario, and our temperatures are unseasonably warm. It's plus a couple of degrees. It's drizzling there now. We should be under about 2 feet of snow, and in Celsius, you know, temperatures like -10, -15. That kind of stuff, and so it's quite a bit milder than what we would expect. The planks haven't moved since the last time I reported. What we have here, and I've just got this one end sticking out a little bit. What I have is some green oak for the ribs. The ribs should have been installed by now. They're not. You can see that I've got the steamer set up. Steaming ribs is going to be one of my next jobs. I've got a tiger torch there. I've got a boiler there. I'll make some minor changes to that before we carry on, but we're pretty much to the steaming ribs stage, getting closer to it. I haven't cut the ribs yet, as you can tell. Here we go into the shop, and you might see that this is a bit of a change from last time when I sort of last checked in. In my last video, I think I mentioned that installing the molds and fairing the molds I expected would be an absolute nightmare. It didn't disappoint. It has been an absolute nightmare, and I'm not done yet. And part of it, the reason for that nightmare, is I'm the master of my own fate. I created a lot of my own problems, but I'm having to work through those now. So if anybody wants to take on a project like this, and when you're having a look at it, people will caution you, they'll warn you, take time to make sure you get those molds set up square and plumb and level and what have you. They're not kidding. So don't be in a hurry to get the mold set up. And that's where I've created a lot of my own problems that I'm still having to deal with. In any event, you can see that the construction grade spruce transom is no more. It can go on the fire pit. You can see I have the oak transom on there now. What I'm using is some old copper fishing line, and you can see it here. And I'm able to mark the center line. I used it to mark the 30-inch water level that I could take measurements off. But as well, I'm trammeling this thing to make sure that I've got it straight and square. And so this copper line is being measured over to a point like that. And then it can be measured over to the same point on the other side to make sure that that transom goes on square. That transom is not permanently mounted yet. It will be shortly. I can remove it and permanently mount it here shortly. But as you can see, I've got a bunch of battens on each side, and I'm still not quite done with the battens. And there are battens laying on the floor there ready to go on next, and then we'll be ready to, once we finish the fairing, then we'll be ready to do ribs. So that's sort of where we're at now. I expected to be planking at this stage of the game. Not happening. Here you can see I've got a rudder that's sort of roughed out, and it's set aside for now, and we'll come back to that later. In the last video, I talked about the header tank and the transfer pump. And in one part of the video, you'd actually see the transfer pump, but I didn't talk about it at all. But you can see, according to the plan, there's the transfer pump. And then when you have a look at it here, there it is again. Princess Auto sells the same transfer pump. Dimensionally, it's identical to this one from 1905. So there you go. There's the transfer pump. That's how we're going to move the fuel from the tank up to the header tank here. And then we'll gravity feed it down to the engine. So there we are. Here are a couple of pieces that I've made up, and I'm anticipating that I'll use these when I start spiling this thing. And when I go to spile it, what I'll do is I'll have my batten on there, and then I'll be able to sit this thing up and then just simply mark it. And then when I go to make my template for the mark it out for the plank, then what I can do is I can just connect all the marks, and that should work fairly well, I think. You can see that there's some blue masking tape on a couple of those battens. Those are areas that I'm not quite convinced that I have it fair yet. So before I go any further, I'll just check those to make sure that they're looking all right. And even putting the header in there in the ceiling of the shop was a bit of a job, because you can imagine that the trusses up underneath there go one direction, and those hard points go 45 degrees to that. So trying to find those, locate those in order to provide a firm hard point to work from has been a bit of a job. And that's about it. What we're going to do shortly, down on the keel, you can see the keel down in the center there. And you can see those marks with the letter R on. That's where ribs are going to go. There are 20 ribs that are going to be steamed and installed in here. And then we'll probably be ready to start removing battens as we begin planking. The molds, you can see that I used a little bit of hot glue just to hold them in place until I could secure them better. But in fact, this is pretty solid. It's pretty rigid the way I've got it set up there now. And that's that. So that's pretty much it. Like I say, proceeding much slower than what I'd anticipated, what I'd hoped. But I think the thing is, as I said in a previous video, just stay at it and work your way through one at a time, and let's see what happens. This building a boat is supposed to be fun, so the idea is keep it fun. And if it's not fun, then step away. What the heck are you doing, right? And come up with a solution and come back at it. Something interesting as well, just before I finish this video off, two things. One of them is the original boat had a transmission in it. So it had a forward, neutral, and reverse gear. I've located a transmission that I'm debating whether I'm actually going to purchase it or not. I'd like to get the project a little further on before I make that decision, actually. And but we could very well have a neutral and reverse gear in this before we're done. You might be interested in this as well. You can see with the rotor, and that is my scarfing jig. And so I can load in planks and wedge them in there like that. And then as I run my rotor back and forth, that's how I scarf my planks. And I've used that a fair bit so far. It works perfectly. A little time consuming, a lot of wood chips, but I've got something that works. And if it works, don't mess with it. So there you are. That's the update on the Lawley Tender there right now. Work is continuing. I've had to take a bunch of time off here. I've had family commitments and so on, but we'll get back to it at some point.